And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and I am going to be talking about how much the format has changed a little bit in the next few videos. I do have my 4th anniversary coming up, which means I've had this channel for 4 years, and man, has a lot changed in that time. A whole lot has changed in the Commander format, and I just made a video talking about how so much has changed with regards to how I build decks. So I went over some actual deck lists that I posted on my channel 4 years ago when my channel first started. Now I'm going to go over the actual staple videos that I made. I haven't done that in a while, so if you're not familiar, I used to do videos, I refer to them as templates. That's how I build my decks. Is I have a template of the staples that I'm going to use depending on the colors, obviously. So I got mono white and, Selesnya, whatever the case may be, any color combination. Okay, if I'm building a white-green deck, what am I going to put in there? I'm going to put the Nature's Claim, the Generous Gift, the, whatever ramp, all of that. And if you have a template like that, it just makes deck building a lot easier and quicker. And of course, for someone like me that builds a dozen decks a week or whatever ridiculous number I build, it makes it a lot quicker and easier for me, right? I just kind of plug it in there. I will switch out sometimes depending on the deck I'm doing, obviously, but a lot of times you can just swap out the staples, right? The ramp, card draw, removal, those are the big ones. I just plug in those templates depending on the colors that I'm playing, and it makes it a lot easier. And I've had a lot of people, I still have people commenting on those videos because I haven't posted one in probably 2 years. I have people posting on those videos, hey, how about an update? So here I'm going to do an update. I'm only doing the monocolored ones though. So the black, blue, red, green, and white ones, I'm going to go over because of course the staples in the format have changed quite a bit. And again, I haven't even looked at these. I'm going to be looking at them for the first time and seeing what I might add in or take out. And I will start with mono red, and of course I'm going to start with Blasphemous Act because I made a video about it about a month ago talking about how I took it out of a deck. I would absolutely still put it in a mono red deck. Again, I'm just talking about the monocolored staples here. If I'm playing a Jund deck or a Boros deck, that might be a different situation. But if I'm putting a mono red deck together, absolutely Blasphemous Act still likely would be the first board wipe I put in there. Without a doubt, it's still a great board wipe. Chain Reaction though, not so much, and that's one I brought up in that video. That this is a board wipe that I used to put not only in my mono red decks, but in a lot of like a Gruul deck or maybe an Izzet deck as well, because green and blue maybe at least used to be not great at removing creatures. I don't play this at all anymore. I have it in 0 decks. I don't put it in any decks that I make anymore. There's too much stipulation there. Again, it has all the issues that a Blasphemous Act has, where there's just so many things that can protect against damage, but also it's more reliant than Blasphemous Act. Like Blasphemous Act is reliant on there being creatures in play in order for it to be cheaper, but at least you can still get a 7/7 creature off the battlefield if there's only one creature in play. If it's the only creature in play, you just got to pay lots of mana. With Chain Reaction, it might not work at all, right? If there's only one creature in play and it's a 7/7, it's useless. It doesn't do anything. So yeah, I don't play this at all anymore. I also don't think I play Starstorm anymore either. This used to be a Commander staple. Don't see it much anymore. It is instant speed, and it does have cycling. By the way, I won't be reading any of these cards because they're all Commander staples, and this video is going to take forever if I do. It's still kind of neat because it's instant speed. That's great. But the fact that you have to pay X, again, makes it not great. I've said before, and I will repeat it again, the red board wipes are actually not super great. Blasphemous Act, and after that, there's a huge drop-off in my opinion. So what am I going to put in my deck? Delayed Blast Fireball, that's a card that has come out, again, since I've had my channel, since I started posting these videos. What would I add to this list? Delayed Blast Fireball would definitely be one. I might also put Chandra's Ignition in there. That's certainly a great board wipe. It also can end games because it deals damage to opponents as well. It depends on the deck. Board wipe might be good in some places, not so good in other places, right? Show-stopping Surprise is another one that does something very similar. I have both of those in my Browland deck because there it works. My commander gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and I can wipe out everyone else off the board. Plus, I really like having my commander in play. Funny enough, Starstorm has cycling. I probably used to have that in there, and I took it out. I probably used to have Chain Reaction in there and took it out and replaced it with those. And in fact, yeah, I have 4 board wipes in that deck, and I believe they are Blasphemous Act, Delayed Blast Fireball, Chandra's Ignition, and Show-Stopping Surprise. And again, as I said, 3 board wipes I had in my original list. Now you should probably have at least 4 because all those protection spells, and again, for red, it's even worse because a lot of those, my team gets indestructible, works particularly good against red. or protection from whatever color works particularly good against red. So you really should have at least 4 board wipes in your mono red deck. All right, the other removal, Vandal Blast, of course, still in a mono red deck, I would play it, but man, it's getting close for me. I mean, this can be really, really good, but it does only deal with artifacts. I mean, I guess it's kind of gotten worse and it's kind of gotten better at the same time because we have all these artifact tokens now. So it is still a really good card. I gotta say, I cannot remember the last time I overloaded a Vandal Blast. It's been a long time. I think, though, this is a card that, again, I might only be playing in my mono red deck. I don't know if I have it anywhere else. It is definitely a card that was an auto, even in a 5-color deck, I would play a Vandal Blast if I was making one. Now, probably not. Vandal Blast really is at its best when you're playing a lot of artifacts. And if you're not, then it's not as good. It's still good, though. I still would put it in a mono red deck. Biforce is another one I mentioned that maybe even more so I would play this. I don't know. Is this maybe getting better? I don't know. Maybe Vandal Blast is still better, but Biforce is still one that I would give consideration for. It's definitely not one that I would shoehorn into any mono red deck, though. Abrade is another one that for me was a staple for a while. I wasn't a big fan of it when it first came out, but then I became more of a fan of it because of the versatility. And then I became less of a fan of it because we just got better options, right? Zoyawa's Justice is one that came out that I was like, yeah, I think this is just a strict upgrade. Again, that's funny enough, a card that when it came out, I was not the biggest fan of it. And then I was like, okay, wait a minute. Is this not just a strict upgrade from Abrade? Because it's going to shuffle that card into library. So of course that gets around indestructible and stuff like that, right? So I think likely Zoyawa's Justice is just better. Obviously you're not stuck on the 3 damage either. You can get rid of a 7/7 creature with that. So for me, that's just a strict upgrade to an Abrade in almost every situation. Of course, Chaos Warp being the king, it is still the best targeted removal for, I mean, maybe entirely the best removal spell in red. As I said, it's kind of funny that the most popular cards in the entire format for red are Chaos Warp and Blasphemous Act, 2 removal spells, which, red is not exactly great at, but it does have some good options, and Chaos Warp, of course, is one of the best. Deals with any permanent. I have more times than I can count, though, seen someone get something really good off the top of their library, and in a lot of cases, and in fact, it happened to me a couple months ago where my opponent shuffled I can't remember what it was. I think it was my Eldrazi Monument, and I ended up shuffling my deck and getting it right off the top again. That happens from time to time, but that's red for you, right? Your options are limited. I mean, it gets rid of enchantments. That's the big one for me. You need to have enchantment removal in your deck, and this is one of the only ways that Rick can do it. Fable of the Mirror Breaker, I think had just come out when I was doing my mono red staples video, and it immediately became a mono red staple for me. It's just a good stuff card, essentially. It does fit in certain themes, but the fact that it's making that token that then makes treasures and you can discard, you can loot with it, which is great. And then it flips over to become essentially a Kiki-Jiki, just pretty great value-y card that you could put in any deck. I definitely would still play it. Professional Facebreaker, again, I think everyone's playing that, and I think I probably still would. This is more good stuff. Like both of these cards, I would put in the good stuff category where I'm only going to play them if there's really nothing else for me to do. If I don't have enough room in my deck, and in fact, my Browland deck is a perfect example of that, where it's a mono red discard theme that's a partner without deck, and I still can't find room in that deck. And I believe I had Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Professional Facebreaker, both of them, and took both of them out to replace them with stuff that just better fit the theme of what I was doing. So again, that's how it works. But if I was making a mono red deck and I had the room, I would probably definitely include both of those cards. Cursed Mirror, which I will be talking about in a video very soon, is really one of the best red cards in the format, honestly. I think it might be right up there. When it first came out in C21, I wasn't a big fan of C21. I didn't think that was a particularly good commander set, but it did have a few bangers in it, and Cursed Mirror was one of the best from that set. And of course, it's a commander staple, has been ever since. There's even some combos involved here. It's obviously a great card. What else would I add in? Maybe Untimely Malfunction. That's just a great card to redirect stuff, right? 2 mana redirect any spell or ability is fantastic, and then you have the extra stuff on there as well. So that would be one that for me would be, I think, a pretty easy auto include in a mono red deck, because it's doing that thing that red does well, but red kind of needs to do as well, right? Red really needs needs the help. It needs the help with protecting its stuff, which is what, of course, those spells can do. And it also needs the help with, as I already talked about, removing permanents that it has troubles with. And that's what you can do with a redirect spell, is someone cast a Nature's Claim and you redirect it to that enchantment you need to get off the battlefield, right? Because, of course, red can't do that very well. So those effects are really important in mono red, and that is a pretty darn good one. All right, let's move on to black here. And man, I got a lot in here, and I talked about the tutors briefly. I don't know if, like, for me, I'm just away from tutors entirely. I do have Mausoleum Secrets in one deck, which is my Ghost and Armex deck, which I have. I mean, obviously I'm in a self-mill theme, so the Undergrowth works nicely. And then also I do have a couple important pieces there, but I don't really need it. I just put it in the deck because, hey, Undergrowth actually works there. That's about the only reason it's in there. I don't really play tutors at all anymore. I talked about Increasing Ambition, I think, in that video, about how that was a commander staple that people played all the time. It was pretty expensive as well. I haven't seen that card in years. Nobody plays it anymore. And I really don't play tutors at all in my decks hardly anymore. The removal, of course, has changed a lot. Toxic Deluge, still the best. And of course, we just got Blasphemous Edict. And I believe I said in my review of Foundations that for me, Blasphemous Edict was probably number 2. Toxic Deluge is still number 1, but Blasphemous Edict is now the second best board wipe in mono black in the format. I mean, 5 mana, almost a guarantee you'll have your opponents sack their whole boards. I mean, you do as well, but you want to remove the creatures from the board. That's the important part about board wipe, right? And it will definitely do that. Sacrifice gets around a lot of effects. It also is an advantage for you if you're in the sacrifice theme. And of course, there is the possibility, pretty good possibility, that it's only going to cost 1 mana. So it certainly is going to be a commander staple, and I definitely would put it in a mono black deck. Still a big fan of Nightmare in Making. It's still one of my, this might be number 3 for me. I know a lot of those big board wipes like the Decree of Pain and the Plague Wind and all that, again, they're just so expensive. They're good, but they're so expensive. And a lot of times you don't want to wait until like turn 8 or 9 to cast a board wipe, right? That's why I don't typically play those. Nightmare in Making for me at Exiles, you can, again, use the scenario where it advantages me. That's really important with board wipes for me, and a Nightmare in Making can certainly do that. The targeted removal has certainly changed a ton. Of course, Feed the Swarm is still a commander staple for me and for just about everyone else because, of course, it hits enchantments. But we do have Withering Torment now, right, which came out in Duskmourn, which has instantly become a commander staple. And it's likely that this could be the most popular card from that set in Commander because it's instant speed. That's why it's better. It's actually 2 and a black, so it is more expensive, but people really like their instant speed, and they're not wrong. Having instant speed on your removal is really, really important. You also only lose 2 life, so it destroys a creature or enchantment, but you only lose 2 life. So if you're getting that, Vorinclex off the table or something like that, rather than losing 8 life from Feed the Swarm, you'll only lose 2. So it probably has enough upside that it's worth the 3. I think for most people, Withering Torment is just a strict upgrade. I would probably put both in a mono black deck, though, for sure. Debt to the Kami, on the other hand, and I think, again, I talked about it in that other video, is one that this is going to be the easy replace, where, just get rid of that. I mean, this Exiles, but ultimately, I think for sure Withering Torment is better because you don't give your opponent the option. Still play Infernal Grasp. That still is kind of the standard 2 mana instant speed destroy creature. Can't go wrong with that. It's funny how many people still play Go for the Throat. I'm like, every time I see Go for the Throat in one of my patrons' decks, I'm like, you guys know Infernal Grasp is just better, right? I mean, you don't lose 2 life with Go for the Throat, but there is a chance you're going to want to hit your opponent's artifact creature, right? There are commanders that are artifact creatures, so why would you give yourself the restriction there if you didn't have to? Infernal Grasp is sort of the standard for me. Poison the Cup, as I talked about in my Staples I Don't Play Anymore video. So again, I've been covering a lot of this lately, how much things have been changing, and this is one I think I don't play at all anymore. Baleful Mastery is even one that, man, I just took this out of a deck. I took it out of my Inama's One deck. I had it in there forever, and I don't know what I replaced it with, but it was a black-green removal spell that's just a little more versatile because, of course, I do have green there. In a mono black deck, I think it's probably still one that I'm definitely going to put in there. Curtain's Call, again, another one that used to be an auto-include for everybody and cost a lot of money, and I don't know how much it costs anymore, but I definitely don't see it as much as I used to. Instant speed destroy 2 target creatures. I mean, at most it's going to cost 5 mana, but it can also cost only 3. I think it's still going to go in a black deck for me. The one I would add on here is Lethal Scheme. I love that card. That's one of of my new favorite removal spells that not only does it have the possibility to be free, but it is also letting you loot, which, you know, is always good, but works better in certain themes. And it also is putting counters on your creatures. So it fits in so many themes and also is possibly a free instant speed removal spell. That's one of my favorite mono black removal spells now. So that would be in my list of commander staples now for mono black for sure. I have Massacre Worm here. I think I don't think that's an auto include for me. Again, it was one of those cards that everyone just put in every deck because it can, you know, be a bit of a hit to your opponents, giving -2 to all their creatures. And again, against certain decks, it's even better. Against other decks, it's not so good. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, they lose 2 life is probably the biggest part why people are going to put in a deck. It has the ETB, which can be important in a lot of decks. It's still great. I wouldn't say it's an auto include for me or one that I would just stick in any mono black deck. Again, this is sort of in that professional face breaker scenario where, sure, I would put in a mono black deck, but if I didn't have room, it would be one of the first things that I take out if it didn't actually fit the theme of what I'm doing, because it is a little bit of a good stuff card. Stinging Study, still one of my favorite draw options in a mono black deck. Of course, it does depend on how much your commander cost, but for me, 4 is the bottom here. I guess if you have a mono black commander that costs less than 4, then I guess you got to find other options, but there is lots. Morbid Opportunist is one, and this again has become, this might be my favorite. I think this is my favorite mono black card draw option in the entire format now. And I believe, I'm trying to remember if I talked about Phyrexian Arena in that video. It might have been a Deck Doctor video where I went on a little rant about Phyrexian Arena, how I used to be a big fan of that card. It just sits there drawing you cards every turn. Yeah, but it's 3 mana. You don't get a card until your following turn. And then, of course, for 3 mana, you want to get at least 3 cards. So that means it takes 3 turns before you get what you want out of your Phyrexian Arena. And obviously, because it costs 3 mana, it's likely you're not going to play it until at least turn 3. So that means you're on turn 6 before you get your 3 cards off of your Phyrexian Arena. That doesn't seem super great, right? I have definitely moved away from that card, and I don't put it in any decks anymore. Morbid Opportunist is, in my opinion, even though it doesn't seem like it, a strict upgrade, because this is a card that you can get a draw off of it immediately. I can play it and then immediately sack a creature and draw a card. And then on my opponent's next turn, they can have a creature die, or I can kill a creature, draw another card, right? This is a card that for the exact same amount of mana, and less black, in fact, even if I'm not in the theme of sacrificing or killing creatures, I very likely will get a card draw before my next turn, the first time after I play this. And there's a pretty good chance I'm going to get way more cards than I would off of a Phyrexian Arena. So this is, yeah, maybe my favorite card draw option in a mono black deck now. Blood Tracker's still a good one. I definitely would say this is not an auto include for me. It fits better in certain themes. This does have the potential to draw a whole lot of cards, although you do have to pay a whole lot of life. It's still a good card. I don't know if I would, is this an auto include for me in a black deck? No, it's not. This probably falls into the Massacre Worm scenario where I would put it in there because it's a good card. It's a big flying creature, and it also can draw you a bunch of cards. But also, I would probably cut it if I had to make room. Dauthi Voidwalker I had on this list. This is one of the most recent cards I think I added onto the list, and this is one that, funny enough, I don't think I'd play anymore. The reason why, I mean, it's even better than I originally thought, right? I thought this was a slam dunk when it first came out in Modern Horizons 2 in every Commander deck, and I was right. I honestly don't even know how many people were really going off about it. I certainly was, because I'm like, okay, this just hates on every graveyard strategy. And again, I'm a guy who's had my brain broken by Marin decks, so I always am like, graveyard hate, yeah. I realized it was actually super oppressive. It's also incredibly powerful in so many different ways. It is one of those almost remove on site cards now. You know, honestly, I mean, maybe I'm just playing in different play groups, but this is in the category for me of a Smothering Tithe or Rhystic Study, where when people see it, they immediately hate it. It makes you a target, and they try to get it off the battlefield right away. And I think the last couple of times I played this guy, it was, you know, I don't even think I got around to being able to use the tap ability because it just got removed right away. So it's very good, obviously. I'm putting it in the same category as like a Rhystic Study or a Smothering Tithe. You could easily put this in a mono black deck. Just warning there, it can make you a target, and it is a hated card for sure. If I was to add in a card here, maybe it would be Black Market Connections. That is probably the most auto-include, generically good staple black card that we've gotten in the last few years that a lot of people would just shoehorn in any deck. I don't have it in any decks. For me, I don't just shoehorn good stuff cards into all my decks. You know, I've tried to shy away from that as much as I can. Again, the Dauthi Voidwalkers, the Massacre Worms, all of that. Those are the cards I cut right out of the gate. You know, people have asked me quite a bit about, well, how do you cut cards out of your deck, or how do you get down to 99 cards when you're building a deck? I'm at 120. How do I get to 99? And my first advice is cut out all the good stuff cards. All the like black market connections, gone. If it's not actually working in your, maybe you want the shapeshifter token, maybe you're in a treasure theme, something like that. If you're not, just cut it. It's a good stuff card. It's the easiest thing to cut for me. If Massacre Worm isn't actually working in my deck, that's the easiest thing to cut for me. Yeah, certainly a good card, but a lot of cards are good in the Commander format, and probably the card that I want to put in my deck is also really good. That's why I want to put it in my deck. So for me, the good stuff cards are getting cut from a lot of these lists for me. All right, moving on to blue. And of course, what blue does best is counter spells. I have Swan Song as maybe my favorite counter spell in the format. At the time I made that video, I had it as my favorite counter spell. I want my counter spells to be cheap, just like my removal. Having expensive counter spells or removal doesn't usually typically work very well for you. This gets enchantments, instants, and sorceries. I definitely, there was more times than I could count that there was an artifact that my opponent was casting, or maybe a planeswalker that I couldn't get with a Swan Song, and it didn't feel great. And of course, I don't know how long after I made this video, we got an offer, You Can't Refuse, which is now my favorite counterspell in the entire format. And for me, has trumped Swan Song. It's also quite a bit cheaper as well. I'm not sure why you would ever want to play Swan Song over an offer You Can't Refuse, because you don't want your opponents to have the treasure tokens. You know, it's funny, when I first talked about that card when it came out, I was like, wow, this is a Commander staple now forever. And I actually had people pushing back on me like, oh man, giving your opponent 2 treasures, that's way too good. I'm like, really? I don't know about that. Of course, everyone plays it now. It is easily one of the most popular counterspells in the format. I think it might be more popular than Swan Song now for sure. I'm still putting counterspell in a mono blue deck, though. You got to be careful. You got the 2 pips there. That is very relevant. But obviously, in a mono blue deck, you're not going to care. I think Negate is definitely an iffy one for me. I believe in my mono blue decks, I put 4 counterspells in them. You know, usually I'm around 3 if it's like a 2 or 3 color deck. In a mono blue deck, of course, again, it's the best thing blue does, so you do have to take advantage of that. I think I would put 4, maybe Negates going in there. Again, sometimes you will get the counterspell that just better fits the theme of what you're doing. Other than an offer You Can't Refuse, I can't think of a counterspell that we've gotten that has been, you know, just an auto include for me. Negate, there's been a few that I've tried and I've been like, like Wash Away was one for me that I tried out for a while that I was like, nah, change my mind. I don't like it. A lot of people are like, hey man, this counterspell is great. You guys should try it. Really don't like the cleave mechanic either. But no, I was like, people liked it because you could counter your opponent's commander with it for 1 mana. And I'm like, okay, I don't like countering my opponent's commander anyway. I think that's a waste of a counterspell typically. So yeah, I tried that one for a little bit. Didn't really like it at all. So I stopped playing it. But sometimes I will put counterspells in that better fit the theme of what I'm doing. Saw It Coming is another one that, I mean, for me, outside of a mono blue deck, this is probably an auto include for me. I just really like Foretell, and it's particularly good. Like Foretell works particularly good with stuff like counterspells, removal, protection, instant speed interaction. Foretell's extra good there. And of course, if you cast it for its Foretell cost, just 1 and a blue, which is obviously a fantastic rate for countering any kind of spell. The removal, Curse of the Swine, is, I mean, I love this card for the reason that it's doing that thing. It is the board wipe that advantages you. It's not really a board wipe. It's kind of the combination of targeted removal and a board wipe, but it is just getting all those problematic creatures that you want off the board. It's also exile, which of course is super important. I still put Pongify in all my mono blue decks. Of course, I think most people do. Rapid hybridization as well. I don't think I'm blowing anyone away with that. Raven form for me, again, one of my favorite cards that has come out since the beginnings of my channel. Has came out at the very beginning of my channel because it just hits artifacts. It also has the Foretell. I know it's a sorcery. I mean, if this card was instant speed, it would just be ridiculous in my opinion. It really has to be a sorcery speed spell just to make it fair. It exiles an artifact or creature. That alone means for me that it is going in every mono blue deck. Resculpt, same thing. And I prefer Raven form, and I will be talking about this coming up in a video. They're very similar, obviously. A lot of people like Resculpt because it is instant speed. I like Raven form better because it is, first of all, not giving your opponent a 4/4. 4/4 is pretty big, right? I don't really want to give my opponent a 4/4 creature I mean, I'm okay with it. Obviously, I'm playing Resculpt in my mono blue decks. Raven Form only gives a 1/1. It also has the Foretell, which I like a lot. Reality Shift is definitely one that has fallen off for me, and I don't know. What am I replacing this with, though? I don't know. Maybe I'm just playing less removal because there's more board wipe options. I used to play more targeted removal in my mono blue decks because there wasn't any real board wipe options for mono blue other than the bounce, of course. We now have the phasing of Zhalfir, which for me is a mono blue staple for sure. That's probably the best board wipe in mono blue. I mean, it's really the only board wipe in mono blue, I think, that actually destroys creatures. So I would put that in. Like, I probably have enough targeted removal in my mono blue deck already, so I don't need Reality Shift. I'm going to replace it with something that gets all creatures, right? And can phase out creatures as well. So that one is for sure a mono blue staple for me. I had Imprisoned in the Moon in this list, and this is definitely something I don't do anymore. A lot of people like this because it can lock out someone's commander, right? And of course, there's 1,000 effects that do this in mono blue. This is one of the best. Just shuts off someone's commander until they can get it off. And I don't do this at all anymore. I guess because I'm just not that interested in temporarily shutting off someone's commander. It used to be more important to me when I played online against randos all the time, where they were playing super powerful commanders. That kind of thing is a lot more important. It's a lot easier to throw an Imprison in the Moon on that Gishath because killing it does almost nothing, because they'll just play it again and it'll attack immediately because it has haste, where an Imprisoned the Moon is actually a helpful effect in a situation like that. I just really don't play against commanders that super annoy me that much anymore because I'm mostly playing with my patrons, so I don't really play effects like this anymore. I still put Aether Spouts in most of my decks, for sure my mono blue decks, and I'm actually becoming more of a fan of these. I was always a fan of them, and now I'm becoming even more of a fan of them because it's similar to it's like the fog effect that I say you need to put more fog effects in your deck, where it's going to just save the game for you, but it's like a board wipe as well. It's like a fog and a board wipe wrapped into one, right? Aetherize as well. Both of those I would put in a mono blue deck. Absolutely. They are not only game savers, but they can completely turn the game around for you. Spectral Deluge is, again, a card that I think I would probably auto-include in every mono blue deck. It's one of the best mono blue, not really a board wipe, but again, because it advantages you, it only hits your opponent's creatures. You got to put it in there. And again, as the Foretell. And Scourge of Fleets, which of course does something very similar. Maybe, maybe not. Like, it depends where you want to be playing this. Funny enough, I don't have this in any of my mono blue decks. I do have it in my Tishana deck, which is a Simic deck, because of course that's doing the ETB creature theme. So it actually fits better there. Don't play this in any of my mono blue decks anymore, though. Again, phasing of Zhalfir is just a straight up better option for dealing with your opponent's creatures. All right, we are moving on to mono green. And of course, what mono green does the best is ramp. You got to have that in your deck. My list here is pretty much the same. I don't think it has changed because how could the mono green ramp get any better? Although I'm looking at this list and I can't even believe I don't have Sakura Tribe Elder in the list. What was I thinking there? There is a few very rare situations where Sakura Tribe Elder isn't like the best at ramp option in your deck. Of course, the fact that it only gets a basic land is kind of a downside, but I mean, it's on a creature. You can reuse it. You can get a dice trigger. There's 1,000 great reasons, or obviously just chumping with it and then sacrificing it to get the land. There's 1,000 fantastic reasons to play that card. It's one of my favorite creatures, maybe one of my favorite cards in the history of Magic. I absolutely love it. So it's an auto include in not only every mono green deck for me, but probably just every green deck period. I don't know if I have a green deck. Obviously I got a bunch of green decks. I'm pretty sure they all have a Sakura Tribe Elder. It's like one of my favorite cards of all time. Wood Elves would be another great version on a creature because it gets a forest. And again, ability stapled on creatures always have advantages because of, ETB. I just want creatures in play. I want creatures to be dying. I want sack fodder, whatever the case may be. But outside of the creatures, 3 visits, again, goes in all my decks. And thankfully, this is a more affordable card now because they've reprinted it a bunch. Nature's Lore, same thing. They both get forest and they come into play untapped. So in a mono green deck, I mean, in a 3-color deck, you can go to Triome, but in a mono green deck, you're just getting a basic forest and putting it into play untapped. So that's fantastic. And again, been reprinted a bunch now. So 3 Vezes, Nature's Lore, Very affordable now. Go in every mono green deck and most of my other green decks as well. Sky Shroud Claim a little bit has fallen off for me. 4 mana to go get 2. Again, you're getting forests. So in a mono green deck, I'm getting 2 forests. They're going to be basic forests and they're going to enter the battlefield untapped. This is still a pretty good option for mana fixing as well. So again, I can go get, in a 3-color deck or a 4-color deck, I can go with 2 Triomes with this. Pretty fantastic. So it's fantastic for mana fixing, but it's also pretty fantastic in a mono green deck still. And I'm pretty sure I have 1 mono green deck and I'm pretty sure this is still in there because, I can pay on turn, whatever, 3 or 4. I can pay 4 mana, go get 2 forests, put them into play untapped and still do something else on my turn. I haven't just tapped out just to ramp, right? So it's still pretty great there. And I still think I would auto include it in a mono green deck. Eternal Witness, back onto the topic of my favorite creatures of all time. Eternal Witness, Sakura Tribe Elder. Yeah, those two are definitely fighting for the top spot, I would say, for as far as my favorite creature of all time in Magic. What game are you ever going to want to play where you are not happy to see this in your hand? That's what I always say about this guy. And again, what I say all the time about when you're deciding the cards to put in your deck or take out, how good is this card early in the game? How good is this card late in the game? Early in the game, this guy's okay. In fact, funny enough, he's less good early in the game, but he's still good because I can play him on turn 3 and get my Sakura Tribe Elder back out of my graveyard and reuse that again. And then I have a blocker or a guy that can get in for damage. And if it dies, I'm putting creatures in my graveyard. It's sack fought again. All of that ability stapled on creatures thing. It's even better later in the game, of course. I mean, what card would you rather see off the top of your library on turn 8? You're running out of steam. I need answers. Oh, I draw an Eternal Witness off the top, and now I can just get any card out of my graveyard. My win con or get my whatever creature back, get a board wipe, whatever. Just love it. Again, put it in every mono green deck for sure. And I think probably every green deck I have has an Eternal Witness in it. Timeless Witness, less so, and it's still good. And of course, it does have the Eternalize, so you can reuse it. It is 4 mana. For me, though, Eternal Witness is still better, just slightly, but it is still better. But I would definitely put Timeless Witness in a mono green deck because it is, of course, doing the exact same effect. So all the arguments I just made for Eternal Witness apply here as well. Road of Return is, I think I've talked about this before in underrated cards videos where, this doesn't see much love and I like it a lot. It's getting stuff out of your graveyard, only permanents, but still really good, and also get your commander out of your command zone into your hand. And of course, you can entwine it to do both. And again, this is another card that late in the game is just, wow, I get that off the top. And now I can pay 4 mana to get, whatever really important permanent out of my graveyard. And then also my commander, which has died twice, I can put it into my hand. So I don't have to pay commander tax. Fantastic. And then obviously in any deck, like my Name is One deck, where I need my commander in hand, it's also another option for that. So absolutely for me, I would probably put this in any mono green deck, but it's also really important in those situations as well where you want to get your commander into your hand. The removal, of course, Beast Within, as I've said before, is the best removal spell in the entire format, as far as because of the color, I guess, right? It's hitting any permanent, it's instant speed, it's exactly what you want in a removal spell. I guess it's not exiling. That would be the only one drawback. The fact that it's green means it's more important because, of course, Generous Gift doing the same thing is mono white, and we don't need it as badly as we do in mono green. This is one of the only ways, really the only way to deal with creatures in mono green. If you're playing a mono green deck, this is probably the most important card in your deck. And if you ever draw it, please don't waste it because you're going to want to save it for the most important thing on the battlefield. Bane of Progress, one of my favorite cards in the entire format. Never am I sad to see this guy in my hand. Again, this is another card where I'm like, oh, Bane of Progress. I'm glad I have that there. I'll just hang on to it until it seems appropriate to play it. And it's funny how people are so worried about you having this giant creature on the battlefield, vanilla creature, but giant creature on the battlefield. I don't even care about that. Usually it's just I've destroyed all the artifacts and enchantments. The fact that I have a big creature, usually that just gets a removal spell into my opponent's hands. Whenever they cast a swords on my Bane of Progress, I'm just like, okay, I'll gain a bunch of life. I don't care. I got rid of all the artifacts and enchantments. That's the part that I really care about, right? Krosan Grip, I used to play quite a bit, and I've definitely fallen off with it. I don't think I have it in any decks. We just have the more versatile options, right? And by that, what I mean is a card that destroys an artifact and enchantment and also does something else. There's so many versions of that Krosan Grip kind of has gotten power crept out of the format. Still great in certain situations, of course, because your opponents can't respond. It's uncounterable if you're worried about that, but I don't think I play this anymore. Nature's Claim, still one of my all-time favorites. This is I mean, again, it's exactly what you want. 1 mana instant speed. How can you do better than that to destroy an artifact or enchantment? The gain 4 life, I've saved my own life and that's with that card before. And that's the funny thing about it is, yeah, give my opponent 4 life, who cares, right? But it also can be used to save your own life. If you are in a super desperate situation, you use this to destroy your mana rock and gain 4 life. I have saved my life with that before. Obviously, we need to be putting Song of Dryads in all our mono green decks. It is another mono green option for dealing with any permanent, which of course again, green for me is like red, where there's just these certain situations that mono red, it does not deal with very well, that we have to make sure we can deal with those situations, with Chaos Warp or whatever. Mono green's the same way. We got to have Beast Within in there, and we got to have Song of the Dryads in there, because there's just those certain situations that you're going to have an issue dealing with, particularly in mono green. I would say it's big creatures, right? If your opponent has a Blightsteel Colossus, how are you going to deal with that in mono green, right? There's not a lot of ways. So, of course, Song of the Dryads will deal with it, at least for a while anyway. Lignify is one I used to play more. I don't think I play this anymore. I don't know. For me, my only mono green deck is my Questing Beast deck, which I use fight effects, so I have less of an issue dealing with creatures. But if you have issues dealing with creatures in your mono green deck, it is still a pretty good option. Acidic Slime as well. I still have in my mono green Questing Beast deck because it has Death Touch, funny enough. And that, again, is the theme of that deck. And it's still good. 5 mana, and it comes down, and it destroys an artifact, creature, or land. And I like that it destroys a land. I think that's still pretty good. Again, ability stapled on creatures is important. And the fact that it's Death Touch, that ain't nothing either. This guy comes down, destroys one of your opponent's best permanents, and then just sits there and nobody wants to attack you because they don't want to lose their creature, and you don't really care about losing your Acidic Slime. It already did its job, right? So I still think this is a pretty good card in the Commander format, and I still think it would be one that I would put in a mono green deck. Again, it might be in that category of, if I have more important things to put in the deck, it would get cut. But I think if I'm just starting out making a mono green deck, I think I would still include it in there. Woodfall Primus, though, is definitely one that I don't play anymore. And this one is certainly good in certain situations. Again, the blinking or it's got persist. So if you're putting +1/+1 counters on your creatures, you can keep reusing it over and over again. But 8 mana to destroy a non-creature permanent. Yeah, I think I don't have this in any decks. And I definitely don't think I would put it in a deck unless there was a specific reason to. The Draw, Rishkard's Expertise. Again, this one is dependent on your commander, of course. A lot of the options there, and nothing has changed here for me, I don't think. I really don't think. There was that era where we just got tons of phenomenal card draw for green, and green became like maybe the best color in the format for drawing cards, and we haven't really gotten anything since. Return of the Wildspeaker would be the one that did it come out? I don't have it on my list here, so it might have came out after the fact, so that would be another one that I would add on here, where it's just doing that thing where I can just draw cards equal to whatever creature's power. You can also do the Hunted Prowess effects or Hunter's Insight effects. There's lots of options there. You can also do the more go wide strategy. Again, it depends on the deck you're playing. Guardian Project I had on my list here. You could also put Great Henge in there, where you're just putting lots of creatures in play, draw cards that way. If you're not in any of those scenarios, and there are decks I've made where I'm not in the go tall or go wide strategy, where you can run into some problems drawing cards in green, funny enough. Yeah, I don't think the green card draw really has changed in the format much in the last 3 or 4 years. It really hasn't, because we already have so many fantastic options. They haven't really printed anymore. Of course, Heroic Intervention, auto-include for me in green. And this card, when it first came out, right when I started playing a Commander format, became an auto-include for everybody. Another one that was really expensive, and thankfully they've reprinted it because, of course, it is an auto-include for everybody. It's just such an easy blowout to assuming Hexproof and Indestructible will work against whatever's happening, that, I just save my whole board and nobody else gets anything because someone just cast an Hour of Revelation or used their Oblivion Stone. The possibilities, and I've heard people cut this card from their deck, and I'm like, what, really? Yeah, there are situations where your opponent's going to cast a Farewell or a Cyclonic Rift where this doesn't work, but there's also the situations where your opponent just casts a Swords to Plowshares. Hey, that's every Commander game, and I can 2 mana instant speed. You don't have to protect your whole board with this. You can just 2 mana instant speed, use this to counter a Swords to Plowshares. That's also good too, right? And then, of course, there's also the situations where you'll just win the game with this card because you're playing your dinosaur, dragon, tribal deck, whatever, and someone cracks their Oblivion Stone and you get to keep everything and no one else does, and you just win, right? So I would still auto-include this in, I think, in likely any green deck I play, and certainly the mono green decks as well. The cards I would add in, I would definitely add in an Archdruid's Charm here. I think that's one of the best green cards in the entire format now. It's just doing so much at instant speed. It is removing artifacts and enchantments. It's also removing creatures. It's also a tutor for lands and creatures. That card's ridiculous. The 3 green pips makes it a little difficult to play outside of mono green, but in a mono green deck, it's an auto include for me. Tribute to the World Tree is probably an auto include for a lot of green players as well. I guess it kind of depends on what you're doing, but not really, right? Because of course, if you have lots of small creatures coming into play, they're just going to get bigger. And if you have bigger creatures that come into play, it's going to get you to draw cards. So it's a win-win situation. And again, the 3 green pips, who cares on a mono green deck? So I think for most people, it's likely a auto include in a mono green deck for sure. One of the best mono green cards in the format right now. All right, we are finishing off with white, and I finished with white because likely white is the one that has changed the most for a variety of reasons. And I'm going to start off with the board wipes here. And of course, Austere Command, I think it will never not be a staple for me. It's definitely one of the board wipes that I go first whenever I'm making any deck that is white. Again, mono white or otherwise, it's one of the first go-tos for me. I just like the variety. I gotta play the board wipes that advantage me. I have Cleansing Nova on here. That's one that's gone to the wayside. I think I have this in 0 decks. Again, it depends on what you're doing, right? Fumigate is another one I used to play all the time that I still have that in my Patron the Kitsune deck because it's a life gain theme. So it fits there, right? Maybe you have a theme where Cleansing Nova fits, maybe, but for me, I don't have any, so I don't play this card at all anymore. Hallowed Burial is another one I had on here that I still just have this in one deck, and it is my Kellen deck, because tucking creatures on the bottom of libraries is an advantage in a couple of ways. It gets around indestructible, and again, I talked about in that video, I think, how the reason why this used to get played a lot more is because when you tucked someone's commander on the bottom of the library, they couldn't get it back. That's not the case anymore, so that's why I think this went to the wayside. Obviously, it went to the wayside also because we just got way better board wipes. However, it still is good, and it still is good in the situation like in my Kellen deck where I can tutor for creatures. So if I tuck my Painter's Servant on the bottom of my library, I can just easily go get it again because it's in my library, right? So that is a situation where you might want to play this, but again, we got so many better board wipes, so many since I made this. And I mean, Farewell's the obvious one that for a lot of people is an auto include. I don't play it anymore, as I have talked about, and go find out my reasons why. By Invitation only is one of my favorites for sure. Again, it does the sacrifice thing, which gets around a lot. It also does the manipulation thing where I can make it advantage me. For me, I play that card a lot more in go wide strategies where, okay, I got 12 creatures in play, so I can pick 4, sacrifice a couple of tokens, have all my opponents sacrifice their commanders or their best creatures, and I get to keep a bunch of stuff. That's where that card is particularly good. There's obviously a zillion options. It's funny enough, Vanquish the Horde is one that when it first came out, everyone's like, oh, that's an auto include in every deck. That's the best white board wipe now. And I think Farewell came out a couple months later. So quickly Vanquish the Horde. I mean, a lot of people still play it. Again, that's another great option. I don't think I play that card in any decks anymore because, again, there's just so many better options. It's still good. Like, white is just so ridiculous with the board wipes where, what are you going to play? I don't know. Just pick the one that fits best, I guess. Martyr's Bond is a card that used to be, I have it in my list here as a mono white staple. It is a good option, but I definitely wouldn't put it in a deck unless it specifically fit the theme of what I was doing. This for a while was a card that I put in every deck because it was like, okay, well, you remove something of mine, I get to remove something of yours, is kind of what it felt like. But again, it is a destroy, right? It put into the graveyard from the battlefield, so it doesn't work against exile, which there's so much more of that in the format. So it definitely got less good. This is a card that I believe I have in 0 decks. And again, it used to be a staple for me, but I probably wouldn't put in a deck unless it specifically fit with what I was doing. Of course, the removal has gotten so much better. It's absolutely insane. Generous Gift, still the best. Obviously, that's an auto include for me. Where do you go from there? Again, it just depends on what you're doing. There's so many fantastic options that I don't even think I need to talk about it here. It just depends on what you're doing in your deck or what you prefer. Like, again, Excise the Imperfect, still a great removal spell. I don't play it anymore. Heck, even Fateful Absence is still a great removal spell. 2 mana instant speed, destroy a creature or planeswalker is still really good. I don't play it anymore, but I wouldn't fault you for playing it. It is still pretty good. There's an embarrassment of riches here when it comes to mono white removal. So you just play the ones that work best for you. Of course, you're going to put Path to Exile in there. You're going to put Swords to Plowshares in there, right? Just go down the list. You have so many options. You just play the ones that either fit with what you're doing or are your personal favorites. There's so many options we've gotten in the last few years that I'm not even going to go over them all here. There's too many. Rebuff the Wicked is a card that I think I don't play anymore. It used to be a staple for me in a mono white deck. I would put it in every mono white deck, but Blacksmith Skill is just a essentially strict upgrade. I know it seems like they're doing something very different, but I'm trying to think of a scenario where Rebuff the Wicked is going to work and Blacksmith Skill isn't. I can't think of one because anything that targets a permanent of yours, of course, your Blacksmith Skill will just give it hexproof, which is doing essentially the exact same thing. And then on top of that, Blacksmith Skill will give indestructible. So yeah. And then, of course, all the other protection options, and I guess I can go into that as well, right? I would rather put something like a Clever Concealment in my deck that is just going to be able to phase out all my stuff, which again works against a Farewell and a Cyclonic Rift, and also works in every situation. I think that a Rebuff the Wicked would work as well. Teferi's Protection was a staple for me, obviously, and is still a staple for almost everyone. I have now taken this out of all my decks. I don't play it anymore just because feel bad card, honestly. Just a feel bad card. I don't like it. I really don't like playing it. But again, there's so many options for protecting your stuff. You don't need it, right? There's Galadriel's Dismissal. That would be another one. I'll throw that out there. And again, we're in the same situation as the removal, where we get so much I protect my team stuff in every single set. I can't even mention them all here. Dawn's Truce. I don't know. How many options you want? Guardian of Faith. There's another one. That one's stapled on a creature if you want to phase out all your stuff. I just talked about it in a video, or maybe a video coming up. I don't know if it's come out yet. The Eerie Interlude effects, I'm funny enough going back to, because I kind of am like, okay, phasing out my creatures for like an entire turn cycle or a few turns can actually be bad. There's actually some downside there. So maybe just blinking my creatures out of existence for a one turn and then coming back on the end step because I want my commander to be in play for whatever reason, maybe that's better. So you have all those effects as well. There's so many options there. Again, we're talking about removal or we're talking about protecting stuff. It's an embarrassment of riches, so I can't even go over all the cards that you could be putting in here. We then, of course, get to the ramp, and I have Archaeomancer's map here, which is not an auto-include for me necessarily. I might put it in a mono-white deck. I certainly have this in a couple of decks. The fact that it's stapled on an artifact might be relevant. I definitely have taken this out of decks, though. I think I don't have this in one of my mono white decks because again, we just have an embarrassment of riches here. Stoic Farmer is another one that used to be an auto include for me in mono white because it gets a plains card. It's that catch up ramp, but it puts the card in your hand if you don't have an opponent. You know, that's the situation you can get sticky with, is if an opponent doesn't have more lands than you, because it does happen sometimes, especially with all the great ramp we have in white now, that, okay, well, at least I get to put it in my hand. It also has the Foretell, which is great as well. Knight of the White Orchid is one that I used to put in every mono white deck that I don't know if I play it at all anymore. Again, we just have so many better options. There's a bunch I could name here. Keeper of the Cord. That one is again, that's an iffy one for me. Like maybe I'll put it in my deck if I want the soldier tokens or if it particularly fits with what I'm doing, but I've also taken it out a bunch of decks. So again, we have so many options now for mono white with ramping that what's the auto include for you? That is where we're at, guys. Deep Gnome Terramancer is certainly one for me. It's not on my list here because of course it didn't exist yet. That is one that I am now putting in more and more. I would say I definitely have it in more decks than a Stoic Farmer, and I have it in more decks than a Keeper of the Cord. It is one of my favorite options for ramping. Even if I only get one land off of it, totally worth it in my opinion. It also can get a Triome. It also can get lands even if you have more than your opponents. There's a lot of reasons to be playing that card. It never disappoints me. But of course, we got a bazillion options now. So many options that you're just going to have to figure out the ones that fit best in your deck. And then we get to that other thing that people used to complain about all the time with mono white, which is card draw. And again, we have an embarrassment of riches. And I do have Esper Sentinel on here. So obviously the last time I did this, when I did my mono white staples list, it was after Modern Horizons 2 came out. And obviously, again, this is just one of the best generically good card draw options in the entire format outside of color, right? Outside of color. If you guys go look at what are the most popular draw options in the entire format on EDH Rec, you will find Esper Sentinel as it's like number 2 or 3. It's like behind Rhystic Study. Maybe there's one other thing in there. It's one of the most popular draw options in the entire format. A mono white card. I also am a huge fan of Archivist of Ogma, which again is very high up the list, which of course isn't on this list. That would be the big one. The big one on this list. Yes, we've gotten better removal options, better board wipes, better ramp, all of that stuff, better protection, man, mono white is so much better in the format now than it used to be. On top of all of that, it has some of the best card draw in the entire format, in my opinion, in Esper Sentinel and Archivist of Ogma. Just generically good card draw that's just going to sit there and draw you cards every turn, and you have to put no effort into it, and your opponent has to use a removal spell on it, or you're just going to keep drawing cards. On top of that, we also have the stuff that fits certain themes, like Cassie's Welcome being, again, one of my personal favorites. If you compare that to a Phyrexian Arena, like a lot of people look at Phyrexian Arena and go, okay, I'm just going to put that in all mono black decks. Okay, we'll put Cassie's Welcome in all your mono white decks, because, I mean, I guess if you're in the theme of I'm playing big creatures, it's not going to work out so well, but most mono white decks are going to have lots of little creatures. It's going to cost a 3 mana. It's an enchantment that just sits there, and even if you don't get any draw on your opponent's turn, it's just going to get you a 1 card draw on your turn. So in my opinion, it's already as good as a Phyrexian Arena. Welcoming Vampire, same thing. And again, stapled on a creature. I could just keep going. I could keep going down. A lot of people like Wedding Ring. I'm not even a big fan of that card, but a lot of people will put that in their deck. It's so funny how almost every category here, obviously white has gotten better, but also I can't even talk about the cards that there are so many auto includes for mono white decks now that you're not going to have a trouble doing anything. I'm doing card draw in my mono white deck. What do I put in? There's so many things to choose from that I just have to pick the ones that fit best. Smuggler Share, there's another one. That's a card when it came out, everyone's like, oh, it's going to be an auto include in every mono white deck. And it was like a $40 or $50 card for a while. Not anymore. I don't know. Does anybody play that card anymore? I have it in one deck. It's still a really good card, but it doesn't see that much play anymore. Trouble in Pairs, there's another one. I don't even play that card. Again, that card, I'm like, I don't even need that. It's obviously really, really good, but I don't even need it because my mono white decks don't need the card draw. I don't need it. I could upgrade. It is a little bit better than some of the options, but I don't need to because I'm already drawing cards perfectly well in my mono white decks. But Trouble in Pairs is an auto include for a lot of people in the mono white decks. That's a commander staple now, right? There's so many options, and I will give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek here because I'm coming up with my anniversary video right away, and I will be talking about the best cards that have come out since my channel started. Spoiler here. There was so many white cards on that list. I just went through and I started picking out cards. And after the list was completed, and I had like 40, 50 cards in there. Obviously, I had to shrink the list down. There was so many white cards on the list that I'm like, man, people are think I'm going to be biased. Like half the list is white cards. People are think I'm just going to be biased here. No, it's just the best cards that have come out since I've had my channel in the Commander format. Most of them are white. Just go through it, guys. Do a little bit of prepper for when I do my list. And what I ended up doing is I ended up doing it by color so that some other colors get more love. And I actually mentioned some cards that are blue and green and red, right? Because white has gotten so much fantastic commander staples. And it was funny when I made my video talking about how maybe white has gotten too good. I got pushback like, oh, people need to play Teferi's Protection because white needs the help. Really? That's why people pay Teferi's Protection in all their 5-color decks? Second of all, white has 1,000 better options. I'm already doing it. I don't play Teferi's Protection because I still have Clever Concealment and I still have Flare of Fortitude and I still have all those other options. So no, you don't need to do that. You don't need to play Esper Sentinel. People play Esper Sentinel in their 5-color decks because it's still a great card draw option in a 5-color deck. And also, in a mono white deck, I don't need to play it. I think I have it in a couple of my mono white decks, and in some of them I don't because I have so many other card draw options. So no, white doesn't need the help. They're playing these cards because they're the best in the format. White has some of the best cards, a lot of the best cards in the entire format now because they've gone completely overboard, in my opinion. And that's how I'm going to sum up this video. I've been screaming it since the beginnings of my channel. Like, does white really need the help? I don't think they do. And there are so many mono white staples now in the format that if you're putting a mono white deck together, it's like, okay, well, what am I going to choose for my board wipes? I have a bazillion to choose from, so I'll just choose my favorites or the ones that fit best. Same with the targeted removal. Same with the protection. Same with the card draw. Same with the ramp. You have so many options now that you just choose the best that fit in your deck, I guess. If you don't think so, maybe you just need to do a little bit more research. I don't know. But for me, I have a lot of these cards committed to memory. And as I'm building decks, I'm just like, I have like 20 cards to choose from for card draw in my mono white deck. what am I going to choose? And of course, I have the colorless options as well, right? But just in mono white, I have so many options that I just pick the ones that fit best in my deck or the ones that I prefer. Or maybe if I'm trying to save money, I don't run out and buy an Esper Sentinel, right? I don't know. For me, that's where I'm at. And certainly things have changed a ton, but without a doubt, the color that has changed the most in the format over the last 4 years is white. Even back then when I started my channel, I don't think it was the worst color in the format. I still think red was. But now, you can make an argument that it's the best color in the format, and I will make that argument. And in fact, if I'm making a monocolor deck, which this video is about, I think you're going to do best in white. Again, all those other colors are lacking in certain categories. White's not lacking in any category. It's doing everything well. That's why if I'm picking a monocolor to play in the Commander format, it's going to be mono white because I know I'll be able to do everything well. And that's what you want to be doing in a Commander game, right? You want to be doing all those different things well. That's my opinion. You guys let me know yours in the comments below. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.